Issues of proficiency and communicative competence are central to second language acquisition. When it comes to learning a foreign language, we see that all around the world, people keep the native standard language as their model. So, whenever a foreign language, not only English, any foreign language, for example, German, Spanish, French, whenever foreign language is learned in a non-native country, the standard or the model is always the native language for instruction. However, the native speaker is not the requirement for teaching that language. So when students learn French, let's say in America or England, the model for instruction will be not a variety of French, for example, not Canadian French or Algerian French, but proper French which is used in France. However, they will not insist on having native French speakers as teachers for teaching the students. When it comes to learning English as a foreign or a second language in non-native speaking countries, we see that these countries show a preference for native English speaking teachers. For instructions, of course, the preference up till now is the native standard English as the model for instruction. But not only that, they also show a preference for native English speaking teachers. And it is believed that non-native English speaking teachers, that is local teachers, for example, if we think of Pakistani teachers are not proficient enough in English and they spoil the English language, and they when the language that they teach is not good enough, and they are in fact harming the English language. Because of this debate about who should be the teachers, whether native or non-native, and what should be the model for the ultimate attainment of a second language, several debates have surfaced regarding pedagogical models as well. For example, which pedagogical model should be used, whether American or British. Similarly, when English is being taught, which English, the UK English or the USA English. So all these debates have also surfaced in the as a result of people's preference for native English speakers as teachers. According to Sridhar, he made this very interesting comment about the situation of second language learning, which is prevalent in the world today. According to him, there are millions of learners of English who learn their English from non-native English speakers and who are likely to use English with each other, that is, non-native English users. And there's also a possibility that these people will never in their entire lives need to use English with native English speakers. So when the English that they are learning, they will never be used with native English speakers. They will never need to use it with native English speakers. What's the point in insisting on having native English speakers as teachers for teaching English? Researchers and scholars have presented a definition of native speakers which looks extremely ideal. According to this definition, a native speaker is someone who has acquired a given language, let's say English, as his or her home language at mother's knee, which means he is able to, or he acquires this language almost since birth. At mother's knee implies since birth, and has never had to take any formal instruction in the language. And also that this particular individual has useful intuitions about the language. That person doesn't need to learn the language and automatically knows all about the grammatical correctness, etc. And when he is or she is using the language, he doesn't have to stop and think about what is appropriate, what is correct, etc. They are so well versed in the language that they can, without having to stop to think about it, they can use the language correctly. This definition seems quite ideal, because we see that non-native English speakers are also quite proficient in the language, and they are often employed by native English-speaking countries, and are even employed in universities as professors, etc. So we see that non-native speakers are also extremely proficient speakers of English. In some cases, they show even better proficiency than native English speakers. So an educated non-native English speaker will demonstrate perhaps better proficiency than comparatively less educated native English speaker, at least in some areas. For example, vocabulary, clarity of expression, and so on and so forth. So, when non-native speakers are proficient enough in English, perhaps better proficient in English than native speakers, do we still need native English speakers? That is a question that we must think about. When it comes to SLA, the conventional view of SLA still favors the native speaker norms. So their primary criteria is again monolingual, that is the notion of native English speaker as the criteria, and their secondary criteria include other social factors. For example, the context, the difference in the speakers, the presence of other languages in the learner's linguistic repertoire, etc. So what we need to do is, in the context of SLA, what we need to do is acknowledge the outer and expanding circle varieties of English. We must acknowledge that English is being learned in a context which is not monolingual, and insisting on monolingual norms for SLA as a criteria may not be a very desirable concept these days.